She stood perfectly still as she had been taught, while the artist captured what everyone believed was a moment of childhood innocence. But she knew better. She had always known better. This was not a portrait of a happy family. This was a catalog, and she was the merchandise being displayed for buyers who would never see her face until after the contracts were signed and the gold had changed hands. The room was filled with the careful choreography of deception, every person positioned precisely, every gesture rehearsed, every smile practiced until it looked natural to eyes that had never learned to see the truth beneath performance. The artist worked methodically, mixing colors that would make her skin look porcelain perfect, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that noble children were supposed to possess, her dress gleaming with the wealth that made her valuable to men in distant kingdoms who collected princesses like other men collected hunting dogs. She had been 5 years old when the lessons began, when her mother's gentle voice had been replaced by the sharp instructions of tutors who taught her that a princess was not a person but a political instrument. They taught her to walk with her spine straight and her steps measured, to speak only when spoken to, and then only in the languages that would prove useful to whatever alliance her marriage would seal. They taught her to smile until her cheeks ached, to curtsy until her legs trembled, to sit so still that she might have been carved from marble, beautiful and silent and utterly without will of her own. The other children in the painting knew their roles as well. The servants who flanked her had been chosen for their ability to make her look more precious. By contrast, their dark clothes emphasizing the pristine white of her gown, their practiced subservience highlighting the importance of maintaining proper order. Even her younger sister had been positioned to serve the composition, placed just close enough to suggest familial warmth, but not so close as to detract from the main subject, the prize that would soon be shipped across the continent like a valuable tapestry or a fine piece of silver. Her parents watched the proceedings with the satisfaction of merchants who knew they had produced something exceptionally valuable. She had heard them discussing her future at dinner tables where children were seen but not heard, planning her life as if she were a chess piece to be moved for strategic advantage. They spoke of the kingdoms that had expressed interest, the dowries that would change hands, the treaties that would be signed with her signature, written in her careful, tutored hand beneath vows she had not chosen to make. The painting sessions had been going on for months, each one a reminder of what she was being prepared for. She would stand in this same position for hours while the artist worked to capture not just her appearance, but the impression of innocence and compliance that would make her attractive to men old enough to be her father, men who wanted wives young enough to be molded into perfect representations of their kingdom's values. She learned to keep her expression serene, while her mind cataloged all the ways her childhood was being systematically dismantled and packaged for sale. There had been a time when she had tried to resist, when she had refused to stand still or speak the required pleasantries to visiting dignitaries who looked at her with the calculating eyes of merchants evaluating livestock. But resistance had been trained out of her with the methodical efficiency that marked all royal education. There were consequences for disobedience, meals withheld, privileges removed, affection withdrawn until compliance was restored and the smile returned to its proper place. The courtiers who filled the edges of the composition served as witnesses to this elaborate fiction, their presence lending credibility to the lie that this was simply a family portrait rather than an advertisement for a commodity that would soon be available to the highest bidder. They knew the truth, of course. Everyone in the palace knew the truth, but they also knew that speaking it aloud would be career-ending stupidity, so they maintained the fiction, praising her beauty and grace while carefully avoiding any mention of the fact that both qualities had been cultivated specifically to make her more valuable in the marriage market. She had learned to read the signs that indicated when a potential buyer was coming to court, the extra attention paid to her wardrobe, the increased frequency of lessons in deportment and language, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms where adults were discussing terms and conditions. She knew that somewhere, documents were being prepared that would transfer ownership of her future from her father to some stranger who had never heard her laugh or seen her cry, who knew her only as a collection of attributes listed in correspondence between kingdoms. The artist himself was part of the deception, hired not just for his skill with paint and brush, but for his ability to create images that would travel well, that would present her in the most appealing light to men who might never see her in person until their wedding day. She watched him work, noting how he softened certain features and emphasized others, how he painted away the shadows under her eyes that came from sleepless nights spent wondering what her life would become, how he made her appear happier and more eager than any child had a right to be when facing such a future. The room was warm, almost stifling, with the heat of too many bodies and the intensity of the artist's focused attention, but she remained motionless, as she had been trained, even as sweat began to collect beneath the heavy fabric of her formal dress, even as her feet began to ache in the delicate shoes that had been chosen for their appearance rather than their comfort. This was what being a princess meant, enduring discomfort with grace, maintaining composure regardless of how one actually felt, serving as a living symbol of everything except one's own desires. As the months passed and the painting neared completion, she began to understand that this moment was both the culmination of her childhood and its official ending. When the artist finally set down his brushes and declared the work finished, she would no longer be a child being prepared for sale. She would be merchandise ready for delivery. The painting would be copied and sent to courts across Europe, each copy carrying with it an implicit invitation to negotiate for her purchase. The final session arrived on a morning when autumn light filtered through the palace windows with unusual clarity, illuminating the scene with the kind of golden warmth that made everything appear precious and desirable. She took her position one last time, surrounded by the familiar faces that had witnessed her transformation from child to commodity, and waited while the artist applied the finishing touches that would determine how the world remembered this moment, when her childhood officially ended and her real purpose began. When it was over, when the artist finally stepped back and nodded his approval, she remained in position for a long moment, looking at the painting that would outlive her, that would be studied and admired by people who would never know the true story it told. They would see a charming family scene, a moment of aristocratic leisure captured for posterity. They would never see the girl who had been trained to stand perfectly still while her freedom was auctioned to the highest bidder, whose smile had been purchased with years of careful conditioning, whose future had been decided by men who valued her potential for strategic alliance more than her capacity for joy.